Okay, I think we have a really great participation in the room already, so I think we can kick off. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on this session on using behavioral science to promote information integrity. So I am Niamh Hanifan. I'm the Senior Advisor for Information Integrity at the UNDP's Global Policy Centre for Governance. This is an issue that we have been addressing through our work for a number of years now. And so really exciting to see the way in which behavioral science has been integrated into our information integrity work and into the work of other UN agencies as well. So we are going to have some presentations today from three speakers, and we'll be following that with a round of Q&A. So I'll be presenting the speakers shortly, and I think in terms of the session, it's incredibly timely, particularly given the year of elections that we're in and the concerns that we are seeing around influence operations and other information strategies that are being used to influence the outcome of democratic processes, among other things. So, you know, the health of our information ecosystems feel more fragile than ever, and that's despite having so many more new and innovative ways to communicate and engage with each other. I'm not going to go into all the factors that contribute to the rise of what we at UNDP call information pollution. I mean, you all surely know many of them already. But I do want to highlight, before we begin, why behavioral science is particularly relevant to the efforts by the UN and others to promote healthier information environments. And I want to just focus on three main points. So first of all, behavioral science already intersects with the way in which we're engaging with information, and particularly online, and more particularly on social media platforms. It's very successfully deployed to optimize digital engagement, for example, essentially to keep us scrolling. It also drives the spread of disinformation by triggering emotional responses to certain types of content and our desire to make sure that others around us see the same. Secondly, cultural mindset plays a very profound role in how we engage with information and new ideas, and how open we are to thinking differently about the world. And we know that where trust in science is low, susceptibility to disinformation is high. And so disinformation can be very effective in activating certain mindsets over others. So for example, by offering information about immigrants that leaves out key facts, or is out of context, or misrepresents statistics, or is consistently negative, we can foster a culture of victimhood that, you know, can make an individual more susceptible to the idea that immigrants are destroying our society, stealing our jobs, etc. And then finally, information integrity as a programmatic field is relatively new. There's an awful lot that we still don't know about what makes for an effective response. There's a lot of amazing learning going on, including with the organizations you're going to hear from today. But by grounding the responses to this in behavioral science, we're acknowledging both the ways in which humans and our social behaviors can enable the spread of false, misleading, manipulative behavior. But we're also recognizing that if we deliberately and intentionally move this field forward based on behavioral science, it really helps us to understand why people behave in certain ways, why people believe certain things, and what interventions might help, both at the individual and the system level. So this really has potential to be profoundly impactful. And we're going to hear three really great case studies today. Coming back to the concept of cultural mindset, a common thread that you're going to hear in these three presentations is one particular behavioral science approach, the concept of prebunking. Some of you may be familiar with this term, but it's really about anticipating certain types of harmful information, deceptive information or narratives, and preparing groups, preparing individuals to be less susceptible to them. So without further ado, I'll introduce our three speakers. We have Ali Muntasir, who is the head of experimentation at UNDP Sudan. We have Joseph Bullock, data scientist at United Nations Department of Peace Operations, and Gisela Lomax, Senior Advisor on Information Integrity at the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. So we will hear from each of our speakers. You will have the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A function, as you can see on the screen. So please feel free to drop any queries that you have there, and we will come back to them in due time. But let me open the floor now, and let me bring our speakers in. I'm going to turn first to Ali to hear about the way in which UNDP Sudan has applied behavioral insights to counter the really concerning, dangerous speech, misinformation, disinformation in the context of Sudan today. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you so much, Neve. And I'd like to start by giving a brief background about Sudan. Sudan has been a country filled with rooted conflicts throughout 50 years. And currently, we are going through a war since 15th of April 2023 that has affected the country nationwide. So why did we start actually discussing this tool, and why did we want to um, begin actually to structure it and to train young people in it? Is because um, hate speech has become a trigger for conflict in our country, and especially in certain areas. So I would like to start by giving what is it that we've built. So before we kind of structured the toolkit, we gave a training on behavioral insights and design thinking to young peace ambassadors, where they develop their own um, content and generate their own content to tackle disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, what we call now dangerous speech and harmful speech in general. So, but then we discovered that there needs to be a little bit more structure to what we're building. So we devised this toolkit together with Talk as a problem solving and step-by-step guidance to help them formulate their ideas. The journey started in Darfur, and then it kind of progressed to into the whole nation, and then into even regional efforts that are now picking it up. We wanted to foster peace in Sudan, and this is the outcome of the project that we're working in. But then we looked at how do we kind of specifically look at utilizing certain innovation tools such as behavioral science and insights, and also looking at system level and design approaches in order to tackle dangerous speech in the country. For whom was this toolkit created for? It was created for influencers in their community, tackling and identifying through to kind of look at into civil society actors and potentially people who can mobilize their communities, and influencers through and then they can go into their partners and influence their communities, and then the community can actually cascade this effect into other communities. So this was the general idea of how we're targeting people. Why will it work? It will work because we're using the PCOM model for behavioral science and looking at the certain framework that we're utilizing and which has shown that it is very effective in these type of scenarios and situations that we are working in. How will it work? What we've created was a learning tool, a learning journey where you kind of understand how your brain functions, how do you interact with social media and the news that you're receiving, and how you should identify these biases, these barriers that you're facing, and how do you deal with them when you're online. So, for instance, we would learn about, for instance, how AI is becoming a tool for spreading misinformation and dangerous speech, and how do you kind of navigate through the content that is coming in, and how you can counteract it. Another way that we're looking at is that you should not argue with people online, but you rather trying to create consensus around what is the best approach of working around it. what is the and what is the most cognitive biases that we face when we are looking at dangerous speech online, and how do you effectively also counteract it? So we use also pre-bunking, like mentioned by my colleague Neve, but we also use debunking techniques as well to counteract and work around the dangerous speech that people face. So these young people who are trained in these type of approaches in order to counteract and create consensus actually around the content online that is created. Also be an active bystander to support victims online and offline. It's not just about identifying them or telling them this is wrong news or stuff. You need to support the people that you're working with, and you need to empathize with them. So there is an empathy process to understand the context and understand the people that you are targeting. Influence the spectators as well, and try to bring in various tools and various techniques in how you can understand the people that you're engaging in so that you can change their mindset. It's about giving people the tools for critical thinking. It's about giving them the ability to rethink and reshape how they interact. And this is some of the interesting aspects of the debunking and pre-bunking. We also kind of gave templates for exercises. So you would do exercises around how to debunk and to practice identifying dangerous speech online. So you can clearly see that there is like a step-by-step process: facts, warning, fallacies, critical thinking, facts. And this is kind of like a sandwich process for you to be able to identify and counteract dangerous speech online. There's also motivating tools, such as generating meme, making it funny, using nudges to make people identify with what you're talking about and actually understand what you're talking about. Another part of it is to motivate people is to look at smart commitments. And this is by creating a stance as someone who is counteracting this dangerous speech online. So there is multiple, so the toolkit was measured in a way that makes people strongly believe in what they're doing and critically think about how you're doing counteracting and identifying hate speech online. This is one of the important aspects, which is the conflict sensitivity principles. So you have to be conflict sensitive around when you are doing, when you're engaging in harmful speech online. And this is a core value. One of the things that came out of this, the process and the trainings that we have provided using this toolkit, is that one of the young peace ambassadors drafted an actual peace agreement between the RSF and SAF that are fighting in Zarinji. And this kind of shows the strengths of empowering young communities in the country can actually cascade into and develop into impactful and meaningful participation. Another thing that I would like to mention is that the toolkit itself is, because it's very engaging and it's very fun, a lot of regional actors have been utilizing it to in order for them to also counter hate speech and online misinformation and disinformation. And that one is our country office in Egypt, and now other countries like Libya and Jordan are actually also interested in utilizing this toolkit. The toolkit is being launched today, actually, and I'm going to be sharing it very shortly. Thank you so much for your time, and I get the floor back to me.
Thank you so much, Ali. There's so much to draw on. It's a very rich resource, and I do encourage anyone who has the link to go through this and spend some time to see the way this approach is being crafted. I mean, particularly when you see the range of challenges that this critical thinking exercise is trying to address, from generative AI through to conflict resolution, cognitive bias, etc. I mean, this is a really, really comprehensive and an extensively researched approach, very well embedded in behavioral science. I see there's some questions already appearing. If the panelists want to respond to those directly in the Q&A, feel free. Otherwise, we'll try and come back to them at the end of the session. So let me move on to Joseph. Obviously, he's coming at this issue from, again, another very challenging context. Peacekeeping operations are naturally face numerous threats, disinformation and hate speech in these contexts that are already volatile with a lot of distrust and conflict dynamics, clearly are very worrying in terms of the impact they're going to have on the safety of the communities they're there to protect, the teams, the operations. So Joseph, the floor is yours to offer an overview of some of the interventions you're working on.
Thank you so much. Just to confirm, you can see the slides okay?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful, great. Well, thank you so much, Niamh, and thank you so much to Mary and the team for organizing the week. It's a great week to be part of, so thank you for having us. As Niamh said in the introduction, I sit within the Department of Peace Operations. We are a department that oversees the 11 peacekeeping missions around the world, including the DRC, South Sudan, Lebanon, Kosovo, and other places. And the challenge of mis and disinformation, malinformation, and hate speech, we are looking at these four different particular areas, which we will abbreviate to MDMH to stand for those four different areas, is a huge challenge for peacekeeping missions. And our team, the Information Integrity Unit, or also known as the Addressing Mis and Disinformation team within the department, is really looking at how we can support and work with our missions to address this challenge and hopefully shape a sort of more positive information environment in which our missions are operating in. The unit works on lots of different topics, including the development of policy and guidance, training, providing analytical support to missions also to try to address this challenge and assess this challenge, developing digital tools and methodologies for their use, including the integration and the increased integration of behavioral science approaches. We're relatively early on in that journey, and so we also are looking forward to collaborations with others. And we also work on partnerships. We partner with many people who are also here with UNDP, with UNHCR and other people internally, as well as civil society, academia, and many others outside to try to learn from them. And behavioral science plays a critical role. It's a critical methodology that can inform and support the detection of mis and disinformation and malinformation and hate speech, as well as inform how we respond to it. So just to give a little brief overview, Niamh already set this up in the introduction by saying that our missions are really affected by MDMH. We have lots of different examples that we can draw on, and we see MDMH as something that affects both the safety and security of our personnel in our mission areas, as well as the ability of our missions to actually do their job to implement their mandate. So we've seen examples of false statements attributed to heads of mission in certain settings that have led to calls for their departure. We have seen false narratives around the work of the mission. For example, the middle example was a tweet which suggested that our mission in Mali was digging tunnels to support insurgents, when in reality this video was fact-checked, and actually the video was seen to be showing tunnels actually in the UK. We also have examples of hate speech targeting different communities, and that obviously comes into other parts of the mandate of the mission, which are there to protect those communities and to protect those civilians. So it's a really cross-cutting, cross-thematic issue that we're dealing with in peacekeeping, and we're trying to work out how we can best respond to that. We know that this is involving actors at many different levels, at the local level, the national level, the regional, and the international. We work in very political context, often in conflict areas, as Niamh mentioned, and so we have a very huge challenge to try to address in peacekeeping. So our approach as a team and at the mission level as well is really to look at how we can address this in a holistic way. So we're taking a cross-mission approach to this problem, looking at how we can monitor, analyze, and respond and evaluate those responses to the challenge of MDMH. And this is what we're doing in our missions. We're bringing together lots of different sections and components of the mission to try to think through this problem, because it's such a cross-cutting issue. It doesn't only affect the political work, it doesn't only affect the civil society work, it doesn't only affect the protection of civilians work that our missions do, it affects all the different parts of the work. And so we're trying to see how all those different sections can come in to play a role. And behavioral science really can play a role at each stage of this cycle. I'll talk to mostly the monitoring analysis one, and I'll touch a little bit on the response one in a minute. So from our analytical framework approach, we've adopted the ABC framework to try to understand how we can analyze the information environment better and understand where the mis and disinformation, malinformation, hate speech is, what is it about, and what should we do about it. And we look at this from 3 angles. One is, who are the actors, who's talking about it, who is involved? Are there certain well-known actors that we need to be aware of? What are the behaviors of those actors that we can detect and try to spot signatures of certain kinds of behavior where people might be spreading, let's say, disinformation campaigns? And what is that content that we need to be aware of? What should we be looking out for? And what do we need to be aware of in terms of narratives that we should be combating and addressing? So from the sort of behavioral science perspective on uncovering MDMH, this is really about how do we make we're really trying to find the needle in the haystack, and how do we make that haystack a bit smaller so that we can try to search for those needles a bit more effectively. So we look at a range of different ways of using this. We're developing data science methods internally, including with collaborations with academics and others, to try to search for signals of inauthentic behavior, for coordinated behavior of online actors that might be signatures of those actors who are behaving maliciously. One example is looking for bots that are online that can spread false information very rapidly. Another one is looking for what's called copy pasta, which is where people are spreading, trying to look like they're spreading organic content by copying and pasting and slightly modifying posts across a whole network of accounts. And that third point is looking at the networks of actors. Who is acting together? Is there coordination in these disinformation campaigns? And how can we surface this using some of the data science methods and some of the analytical methods that we're developing with our missions, in collaboration with those missions, and rolling this out? And we've begun rolling these out through our training programs in our mission areas, and we're constantly learning from others who are doing more on this so that we can try to get better. And then I'll just touch on the responses at the end. We're also trying to move, as Neve said, a lot of us are looking at how we can do pre-bunking. We're really trying to move from being more responsive and reactive to being a bit more anticipatory and preventative, because we know that once the narratives are out there online, we've already lost half the battle in terms of trying to address them. It's much better if we can get ahead of them. So we're really trying to see, how can we learn from past events and challenges? What have been those narratives, and what responses have been effective? And we can do that through monitoring, analyzing what's happened in the past, and we're using those to anticipate and try to be more preventative towards those kind of events in the future. So what we're doing right now is we're mapping out what are those high-risk moments where we see particular spikes in mis and disinformation narratives targeting the work of the mission. Examples of these include elections, they include transitions, they include the Security Council debates in which the mandates of the missions are renewed. All of these are examples of these high-risk moments, and we're trying to make sure that we can get our messaging ahead of those moments, being careful not to seed new disinformation campaigns or give ideas to those who want to try to spread those particular narratives, but really trying to sort of be much clearer about what we're doing in those mission areas, why we're there, how we're operating, and trying to be a bit more ahead of the narrative. So that's in broad brushstrokes what we're doing. I'm happy to answer any questions a bit later on. Thank you so much, and handing back to Neve.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I think you're highlighting there the additional challenges of trying to address a very challenging complex, but in situations and contexts that are, by their nature, somewhat unpredictable and prone with various kind of polarized communities and groups with different intentions. So, the challenge is really significant. And I think it's really great, the work that you've been doing to be more preemptive and be more responsive, particularly for those high risk, flashpoint moments that you can anticipate, and certainly be really interesting to see how that work develops for DPO. So finally, let me turn to UNHCR. Obviously, a humanitarian response that has been impacted by, directly or indirectly, by information, harmful information, misinformation, hate speech, etc. It's, creates its own set of challenges. Protecting people, offering humanitarian assistance, all of this becomes so much more complex when hate speech and disinformation are really impacting on the decisions that people are making, the choices that they're trying to make, and some of which are literally life or death. So let me hand over to Gisela for an overview of the work that she has been leading in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Neem, and thank you to Mary and all the organisers for the opportunity to take part in the UN Behavioural Science Week. It's really valuable for us for learning as much as sharing. So if I could just bring up my slides. There we go. And just move that part down there. So as Neem said, I work for UNHCR on the information integrity portfolio, really trying to develop a practical response to address the harmful impact of misinformation, disinformation and hate speech on communities, refugees, internally displaced, stateless, all the people under UNHCR's mandate, and on our own operations as well. And we see this work, I think, as everybody does, as a social good, and want to share what we're doing and learning as much as possible. I think on the behavioural informed approaches, I will be very honest and say we're very much learning as we go, building the plane as we fly it. So I think a lot of what I'm sharing today is what we're working on, and hopefully in future iterations we'll have more results to share back with you as well. So if I just go to the next slide there, a few words on the challenge, the background. So first of all, and I won't dwell on this, I think everybody's pretty familiar, but really the kind of weaponization of these types of information risks, and crucially, what's the real world impact? So we're talking about an array of harms to communities forced to flee, really kind of limiting and threatening the delivery of accurate and trustworthy information, and also the threats to humanitarian operations. Both organisations and individuals are increasingly being targeted as well. Of course, a damaged information ecosystem has other knock-on effects, including partnerships, fundraising, communications, campaigns, and so on. This slide, I won't dwell too long on this, but just outlining some of the very specific challenges and needs, which I'm sure will dovetail with your own experiences. I think you can see there that first point, that one of the issues that we're grappling with in relation to digital platforms, social media platforms, is that the company's own policies are not being applied to the same extent in humanitarian and crisis contexts that are not commercial markets. You know, the places where these companies sell ads, they're just, I think there isn't the same incentive to perhaps do the same content moderation to the same level. There isn't the same resource and capacity, especially when these contexts are places with under-resourced languages. And I think this also ties into some of the increasing risks around AI. Obviously, most content moderation has been run by AI models for many, many years, but the human in the loop factor is critical. And we know all too many examples of, you know, digital platforms not having humans in the loop who have that knowledge of the context on the ground, the languages spoken, the culture and history, and so on. So there's the kind of policies, there's the issue of delivering trusted sources of information, which are so critical, especially in crisis contexts. I'd note also the politicization increasingly of working on counter disinformation. And there on the right, you can see some of the needs, and on a very basic level, awareness raising. I think, you know, the kind of humanitarian aspects perhaps don't receive quite as much attention as other areas, public health perhaps, and so on. So it's really great to join in with our young partners in these platforms and try and increase attention and awareness of the humanitarian dimensions of the problem. I'll move on swiftly. I wanted to share some new data with you first. We've run two surveys, one of a smaller group of refugees and one of UNHCR personnel, and just to share some of the findings here. This was a survey of refugees attending the Global Refugee Forum, a big kind of summit in Geneva at the end of last year, with some pretty grim findings there. 85% of respondents have witnessed MDH, 72% have been personally attacked, and you can see some of the areas and the impact there on the slide, and I'll be able to share these more widely in due course. You can see there a slide showing some of the primary types of disinformation impacting on our work, you know, in terms of discriminatory misinformation, discrediting claims about funding, service scams, and so on. Also turning to the survey of UNHCR personnel, which covered, we had responses from 85 of our operations around the world, and an array of functions as well, you know, staff working on protection, on operations, on communications, partnerships, and so on. But overwhelmingly, the majority are very concerned about the impact of MDH. And you can see there the risks that were outlined by our colleagues. One kind of brighter spot here, and I just want to underscore this is really central to our work and approach, that refugees are already, you know, and have long been active participants in this space. 1 in 3 UNHCR staff know of or are working off refugee disinformation and hate speech, and I'm really pleased to say that our work is very much centred on kind of co-design and collaboration with affected communities. We have a refugee advisory group, and I think at the field level there's a lot of good work being done there, and that speaks to the need to build the ability and agency of affected communities to respond as well, not only UNHCR and, you know, humanitarian partners. So as I move on to sharing a quick example of something we're working on, specifically drawing on behavioural science, this slide just shows some of the needs from the field, from the country operations. And you can see there a big demand for tools and case studies and insight and guidelines, as you'd expect. So this is really our driver. And this summer we'll be launching a MDH response toolkit, which there will be an external version of that, and so we'll be happy to share that, and as we can we'll be adding in case studies and results of these various interventions we're testing. So I'm going to speed up a little bit with one eye on the time. Let's me whiz past the areas of engagement. I do want to just pause on this slide here. This is one of the responses where we've been developing a digital platform to monitor hate speech targeting communities. It's called Hate Free, and it's been developed by UNHCR's analytics team. And if anybody would like to know more, I'm very happy to put you in touch with them. And I think hopefully this tool, which is still in development, we're at the testing stage now in some of our pilot projects, leveraging AI to protect refugees from online hate. So it's very innovative, it's very new for us, and I'm pleased to say we've been able to benefit from some really close collaborations with partners, including those on the call today. I can see DPO, UNDP and others to learn from their work and develop this, you know, together. So turning more to behaviours, you know, I think there's a lot of considerations there. You can see whether that's identifying and really starting to analyse the information, where it's coming from, what format, what impact it has, and trying to predict a bit more. So an intervention that we're testing now is prebunking. A little bit of background in case you're not familiar. Debunking, fact-checking is pretty well known and really plays a critical role in digital platforms response, in media's response, and in many organisations. But there are some limitations when it comes to addressing mis and disinformation and also hate speech. You know, once people have accepted a false claim, it can be quite challenging to change their minds, even when presented with new evidence and the facts. So really the premise of prebunking is to get in front of the lie, if you like, and develop a psychological resilience before people even encounter the falsehoods and the misleading claims. So the tactic consists of 3 parts: a warning that there will be attempts to manipulate them, a microdose, so giving people a little taste of the misleading claims so they can identify it when they do see it, and also a refutation. And I think, as colleagues on the call have mentioned, it's a very, very delicate process to not inadvertently cause more harm and you know, emphasize the falsehood. So we've launched a new pilot project in one of UNHCR's country operations, and currently we're selecting the private sector partner. This pilot is supported by Innovation Norway, and you can see some of the other companies that we're engaging with on the slide. But really, what's really exciting is it's built around a private sector partnership, and we're looking now for a company in the country region that we're focused the pilot on. And sorry, I can't share that quite yet, but but we'll be able to come back with more on that, to really take advantage and opportunity to build out those private sector relations with companies that really have that local, national level knowledge and technical expertise. I think, let me skip over to the next slide here.
Just 30 seconds, Giselle, if that's okay.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll skip past this slide, just shows some of the tactics. So we're looking at whether that's a game, video, text-based communications. And then this is the last slide here, just on the approach for the pilot. So it's to develop the tool with the private sector partner, to test it in the operation. There's 4 phases. So appraisal of the options, development, testing, implementation, and then really just sharing there some of the questions that we're considering as we go along the way, and outlining, of course, that community consultation is key. So I'll stop there. I've left that slide with a few of the insights and recommendations that we're focused on at the moment. Happy to share more, and also happy to come back perhaps next year and share some of the results from this work. And if anybody's interested in collaborating or sharing specific insights on your work with us, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Neem.
Thank you so much, Gisela. And I think you may have a few offers already in the Q&A, so feel free to browse. Thank you so much. I think your presentation and the others just really highlights the importance of understanding and responding to these informational challenges in contexts where people are so much more vulnerable to them, in contexts that are broadly less well understood, less well researched, very understudied, I would say. And as you said, Gisela, in places where, the kind of those large online companies that are really controlling the global information flows are not necessarily investing the same kinds of resources to protect those populations from some of the more harmful types of content. So I can see there's a very active Q&A. And I will just do another round of our panelists so that you have an opportunity to potentially pick 1 or 2 of these that you would like to respond to. So let me go back to you first, Ali. And I see there's an awful lot of questions just about the sort of practical implementation and rollout of the toolkit that you've responded to, but maybe you want to just make a couple of points more broadly about how you've implemented the toolkit, how, kind of what you're planning to do next with it, what kind of partnerships that you would be looking for, etc.
Thank you, Neve. Yes, so the toolkit now is launched officially, and it's up and running on the website, and you can access the link that was shared. What we're trying to do now is look at how we can develop it into a course, also create bite-sized content that can be easily engaged. One of the outcomes that came out was also a gamification process for the toolkit by our colleagues in the Accelerator Lab in UNDP Egypt. They took the toolkit and then they contextualized it to some of the issues that were happening around misinformation, disinformation around Palestine. So the idea is that this toolkit is not just should not be contextually for the Sudan. It's also can be widely used and can be contextualized easily because it's a very comprehensive and broad toolkit. We're also had conversations with United Nations Staff College on creating a full-fledged course on it. And this conversation is still ongoing, but we're hoping that it can be up and running soon. There was a question about, I just wanted to pick up very quickly about how we realize practice and the conflict management principles or approaches when officials deliberately use hate speeches for political gains and so forth. I think our role is to in the peace building approaches to build consensus, but also and the do no harm and conflict sensitive approach. We need to really focus on around how do we create resilience in our communities, and this is the absolute general question: how can we make our communities more resilient? How they can have critical thinking and critical minds in order for them to receive the information and be kind of cautious about how the information is utilized, and they can be very careful about how they address it. This I think is the core value that we came up with in when responding into this, especially hate speech in our country, because hate speech can create massive violence, and we've seen it in a Genena, where hate speech kind of in the first few months of the war escalated into ethnic cleansing, and now people call it a genocide. So countering this, I think, and addressing this issue is really important. And I think we need to really grasp this holistic approach and peace building and bringing in innovative approaches to tackle these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali, for elaborating on the approach and on the potential uses of the guide. And I'm sure that you would welcome any contacts from those on the call that would like to potentially partner on this. Joseph, let me turn to you. I see there's a question specifically to you around elaborating on the methods you use to identify the barriers and enablers to the behaviors you're looking to change. So please feel free to respond to that. And there's another more general comment to the panel around engaging with social media companies about their use of algorithms to elevate and to reward harmful content. So perhaps you can share some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the great questions. Yeah, I'm on the first question on the sort of enablers and the barriers. I'll tie that into a question also that was in the Q&A on looking at the sort of proximal cause of where some of this is coming from. It was noted that the ABC framework is very much what is happening, who are those people, and what are those behaviors at the top level, rather than necessarily digging into those whys of people having these sort of opinions. Why is this happening? And that is linked to what is the behavior you want to change, or what is the behavior that we're most concerned about, the underlying behaviors. So absolutely right that framework is really at that sort of higher level. The point of taking that approach is we're really trying to understand what is out there, so that we then know how we can dive a bit deeper. But what we're trying to do in our missions is what they're already doing, is trying to work holistically across those different sections, because everyone has a piece of the puzzle to bring to this challenge. The mis and disinformation, malinformation, hate speech can be very subjective. One person's disinformation is not necessarily another person's in their perspective. And so we're bringing together, for example, not just those components of our missions who can do analysis, and not just the communications colleagues, but also those colleagues who are doing political affairs. They bring a political angle that can help us understand why at a political level a certain narrative might be perpetuating and might be going around in the online or the offline environment. Similarly, we're trying to bring civil affairs into the room, because they can say, okay, well, the communities in our areas are saying these things. The communities are actually feeling these particular challenges, and that is why this particular narrative might be perpetuating. This might be the root cause of it. So that helps us also understand a bit about what are those enablers and drivers, and what we can try to do to disrupt that and to really change the narrative. I think on top of that, a big challenge that we experience in the UN, and certainly in peacekeeping, is communicating what we are there to do. Our mandates change, and they're very complex, and each mission has a slightly different mandate. And so but if you are somebody on the ground and you are saying, I'm in a region where there are terrorists, and why is the UN not there with all of these military people to go and wage a war against the terrorists? That's not our mandate. The mandate might be protection of civilians, which is a very different mandate to actually actively attacking terrorist groups. But to somebody who's in a village who's being attacked by terrorist organizations, that is a very fair question. That is a nuance that is maybe lost. And so we have to be better, more creative continuously in what that messaging looks like. And that's through active communication channels. It's also through sending out our community liaison officers. It's working with communities and helping educate them and help them understand the work of the mission, but also make that a sort of two-way dialogue. So I think the complexities of the political and the conflict situation is a huge barrier. It's not an insurmountable barrier, but it's one that we need to be better at doing. And I think that's also where the prebunking comes into it, because you need to have some time to really go through these complexities and understand these complexities and communicate those complexities and work with communities. That's not something that you can do reactively. You can't suddenly explain a complex mandate reactively to a really harmful narrative. It's not going to make any difference. It's not going to get traction. And so we kind of need to meet people where they are, have those conversations, continue to adapt and evolve in our communication strategies, and also not just have that as a strategic communications issue, but rather how can we all communicate more strategically across all of our different sections. So I think that's kind of like the approach that we're taking to understand those root causes, those enablers, and those drivers. But also adding in that sort of behavioral science element is something that, as I said, we're really trying to get more concrete on and try to roll out into our missions as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Joseph. And I mean, I think it's clear from each of these initiatives that, you know, some of these behavioral science models and approaches are still being tested, right? And we're still trying to understand, you know, what these intended impacts might look like, you know, how we are getting there and how we measure those. So I think it's actually a very exciting point in this field, and really, really interested to see how all of these initiatives, you know, evolve and mature. And maybe with that in mind, I will turn to Gisela for some rather challenging questions, perhaps related to the degree to which prebunking works and should be further explored. So it'd be great to have your thoughts on that. And then the question around, you know, the social media companies, their platform design, and their willingness to effect changes and make choices that they know will reduce the impact of some of these challenges.
Thanks, Neem. I think first the question on how effective is prebunking. Well, the jury's out. It's certainly something that's very trendy. Everybody's talking about it, but we are seeing it being used in very big scale, you know, cases. I think there's a lot of it around elections at the moment, but we have seen some strong case studies of prebunking being used to combat mis and disinformation towards refugees specifically, and I'll drop a case study by Google actually into the chat shortly. So I think, you know, rigorous evaluation will be part of it, and we've been very careful to choose where we're piloting this so we can do it in a way that it's very, very possible to measure the impact, because you know, very frankly, and nobody has money to throw at this, and not in our world. It's the opposite. Resources are extremely stretched, and I think that's key as we develop a practical response to mis, dis and hate, is being very ensuring the response is very efficient and really are worth the time and cost. And I think also somebody did put in a very good question about the Eliana, about the backfire effect, and I think that's really important. You know, and the more we can learn about behavioral science as well, the more we can learn. I mean, as somebody from a communications background and working in crisis comms and so on, I was always taught never to repeat the allegation and the falsehood, and then here we have with debunking doing the opposite of that. So I'm very wary. It's a very delicate process, and I think we also have to choose these pilots carefully as well, and perhaps I mean, certainly for us, we're trying to identify slightly lower hanging fruit to test this on. And then Neem, quickly on the platforms. Yes, we work very closely with all of the big social media, digital companies, platforms, regular meetings and engagement, really kind of testing different approaches, but they're part of the problem, they're part of the solution, they're a key stakeholder. And so developing those relationships globally with headquarters teams, country, regional teams, and on a very basic level as well, showing them evidence and examples, because I don't think it's necessarily on their radar, so they know. And then but I do think practically, especially for humanitarian organizations who are on the ground in these places, we have a lot of insight and information to share that may be built into early warning systems. Back to you, Neem.
Thanks, Gisela. And I wondered if you wanted to approach that question from Catherine, just regarding, let me read it out for you in case you can't track it down. When it comes to prebunking, how does the element of mistrust play into the function? And I open this to the other panelists also. Do you think that prebunking misinformation would decrease mistrust in organizations or governments, or could it pose a challenge to the receptivity of those that are exposed?
I'll quickly answer. I mean, Catherine, I think that's a super question. I'm going to copy paste that because they're really important considerations. I think there's multiple answers, but one thing I would say is to really look closely at who the messenger is. And I have seen some examples of prebunking backfire because it was the wrong messenger, it was the wrong format. And I think that plays into other questions about engaging different stakeholders as well. Perhaps, you know, certainly for us, UNHCR might well not be the right messenger to deliver the prebunking, and it's identifying who is.
Thanks so much, Gisela. I think we have a couple of questions here that I might put to the panel as we come to the close of the session, and they just sort of grouping them together. There's a question here on the unique role that the UN can play in addressing information integrity. And then there's another question on, what is the, practically what is the UN doing at the global level, and how can we coordinate? I think these are super important questions. I think certainly from UNDP's perspective, there is no doubt in our minds that like effective coalition building around these issues is a must-have, not a nice-to-have. So it would be curious to hear the perspectives of each of you from where you sit in terms of where you see the value of the UN, where you see the value and successes maybe in some of this wider coalition building. Let me go to you first, Ali. And thank you for putting on your cameras. Keep them on.
Thank you. These are excellent questions, and I think in the global level, I think what we need to do is create partnerships around information integrity. These partnerships can be from creating from civil society, from social media, companies, to journalists. I think once we kind of create these type of networks and partnerships and allow us to truly build trust, this is one of the approaches that we need, is to empower ourselves into creating and bridge trust, because I think this is one of the main concerns, is that trust is a major issue, especially with especially nowadays. People don't know what to believe. And I think if we kind of put factual information out there where people can trust that, this is the start. I think the other part is that we shouldn't really neglect or try to fight dangerous speech or harmful speech in general, because the minute you're into a conversation debacle, the outcome becomes more of a the conversation becomes very narrow. We cannot have an actual dialogue, which is what we need to be doing. We need to find common grounds with people, and we need to amplify the voices of the community. And this is, I think, is another factor that can help with information integrity, is focusing on creating dialogues, consensus. And I keep repeating that because this is, I think, is a major factor that the UN role can play. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Joseph, your thoughts?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a big question. Maybe just picking up also on the question that Gisela answered on the success of pre-bunking, which I think is kind of linked. I think it is about the messenger, and I think it's the UN is still, hopefully I'm not naive in saying this, the UN is still a trusted entity in the places in which we operate. While we experience these challenges of misinformation and challenges to broad information integrity, we are still a broadly trusted partner with those communities and with those national authorities and with the international community within which we work. So I hope we are still a good messenger, although we should be creative and careful about the messages that we also use to help us with our narratives. I think we're also ingrained in so many different situations around the world, which gives us also a reach into communities that may or may not already be represented, to sort of Ali's point. And that presence globally is also a unique factor to the UN. There are many organizations doing phenomenal work, and nothing that we do is in a vacuum. In fact, we partner in every single bit of the work that the UN carries out, from peacekeeping to humanitarian to development. We all are reliant on our partners that we create, but we do have a presence like no other organization, which we can and do leverage for many things that we do. And we should question our role. We're not going to do this alone. We are going to leverage those partnerships, and that touches on the social media platform question. It touches on other questions around how we can communicate better. We're really good at creating tables to bring people together, and we are still also the only organization that can do that at the scale in which we do it, which is not to sort of blow our own trumpet, but it is kind of our function in the international system. And so we should make sure that we're creating more of those tables to have that dialogue around. And I'll close on one final point to those communities, which is a core pillar of sustainable development is that we leave no one behind. And I think that's really the root of where we are so embedded in so many different communities and societies. And what we're really trying to do here at the top level with the SG's policy brief on information integrity, all the way down to how we're working with communities in rural villages in many countries, is how do we make sure that no one is left behind in all these operations that we do? How do we advocate on their behalf? And how do we create the structures at all those levels that can make sure that those people are represented and that their voices are heard? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I think these are all really great points. And you know, I would certainly second the comment on some of the global mandate that's emerging within the UN system on this issue has been really promising and really great for those of us that work at the technical level to see that develop, and really interested to see how it continues to evolve. Gisela, a 30-second to 1 minute thought from you before we wrap up.
How can we work together? This is key, and I think they're echoing you all that the UN has that convening power, and we must use it proactively and frequently to make sure that we're not duplicating, we're learning from each other, and we're also a stronger force on the advocacy front as well. So thanks again to the organisers of today's events, because these are really, really important, and they certainly add up, and I personally take away many learnings back to UNHCR. Thanks, Neem.
Thank you so much, Gisela, Joseph, and Ali. Your contributions are so appreciated. The work that you do is so challenging, but so needed, and very innovative, and very, very important for us to keep connected and see how everything develops. I would just say, you know, maybe to reiterate the point there, the UN is not in itself immune to these efforts. As an institution, we are being undermined, and trust in the multilateral system is also being undermined. And this is on top of the risks that are faced by our teams and the communities that we work with in the kind of information environments that we're now working in. So we take this incredibly seriously. I see a lot of fantastic questions and comments in the Q&A. I'm so sorry to those that we were not able to get to. I know that our panelists have been diligently responding in writing as we go, which has been fantastic. But I do see a thread of interest to engage with you and the work that you're doing, to engage more with the UN. So I really encourage that, and encourage participants of this event to reach out to the panelists, to reach out to the UN more broadly. Thank you so much to Mary and the team for organizing. It's been a pleasure to moderate. Thank you all for attending, for your great engagement and your fantastic questions, and enjoy the rest of Behavioral Science Week.